You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
Greetings, everyone. Coach Jen here, and thanks for tuning in to Horse Tip Daily, episode 1563. Today, I'm sitting down with Dr. Anna Dunaway to chat about the importance of forage quality, forage quantity, plus ways that we can replace or supplement traditional long-stemmed forage when that's what our horses need. And I'm so happy to welcome back to the show Dr. Anna Dunaway. She is a nutritionist on the Equine Technical Solutions Team at Purina Animal Nutrition. Welcome back to the show, Dr. Dunaway.
Thanks for having me, as always.
It's so much fun to chat with you guys, and I so appreciate the fact that you are willing to come back on the show and answer my really obvious and probably stupid questions. But today, we're going to be talking about hay and forage for our horses, and I think that's kind of timely considering the time of year we're doing this, isn't it?
Beginning of winter is a good time. At least maybe if you haven't done it already, it's a good time. Better late than never to think about your hay supply for the rest of the winter into the essentially late spring. It's going to be a while till we have more hay available. So better think about what we're going to do till then.
Got to think about what we're going to do then. Not just quantity, how many bales you're going to need, but I guess we need to think a little bit about the quality of the hay that we're feeding all year round, but extra especially in winter because there's no grazing available. What are some things that horse owners can look for to help to judge whether or not the quality of hay is appropriate to feed horses?
Yeah. Most horse people have probably heard the term horse hay as opposed to cow hay.
Yes, that gets thrown around all the time on Facebook Marketplace.
What that mostly means is that horses don't do as well with the kind of more mature, stemmier, less digestible hay. That stuff needs to be headed towards cows. And horses need hay that is more digestible, more free of weeds. They have much lower tolerance for things like mold and contaminants, things like that. So that's what we need to be watching out for when we're shopping for hay. It needs to be, clean, free of weeds, free of mold, not rained on, put up well. And then ideally, it would be soft and green and smell good and all of the things that I think a lot of, experienced horse people just kind of inherently know, but it's good to keep in mind color, smell, feel. I always tell people if it hurts your hand when you're like flaking off a flake to throw, if it's prickly, that is a sign that it's prickly inside your horse too, and maybe it's not very digestible.
Very interesting. So you should pop open that bale and give it a good sniff. It should not smell musty, dusty like a house that was recently flooded.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It should smell nice and sweet.
Yeah. And, I think a lot of people, when you're shopping for hay, you make generalizations in terms of first cut, second cut, third cut. And there are some things we can assume. Sometimes you can assume that the first cutting is going to be a little more stemmy, a little more mature, a little lower calorie, potentially a little more appropriate for your easier keepers. And your second and third cutting are going to be the richer cuttings. But again, that's a generalization. And of course, it just depends on the type of year and growing conditions you had. So I just would want to mention also that the best way to know what you're really feeding is through a hay test.
Now, whenever you buy your hay, if you're only a small operation and you only have a few horses to feed, testing each load of hay you get because it's smaller might not be cost or time effective. But you can purchase hay through certain retailers that has been tested.
Yeah, if you're going to the feed store and picking up a pickup bed load of hay every week or two, it's not worth you testing every load yourself because you're going to be done feeding that hay by the time the results come back. And you're not really going to be able to take any actions based on the results either way. So if you're buying in smaller quantities like that, at least asking if there's an analysis available, if you've got some sensitive cases, if you're looking for something specific. Or if you are getting it by the truckload, then yes, having someone come out and test with a real, hay probe, all of that could be worthwhile. if, again, you've got some specific reason, you've got a lot of carbohydrate sensitive horses on the farm, things like that.
So if you're one of those folks, and there are many of us out there who have to get hay every week or every month, it might not be the same batch of hay from that retailer we get it from. Is it a good idea to just change hays, or should we stop and get more hay before we run out of the current hay, and why?
Yeah, everyone gets so worried about changing grain and think that that's the most hazardous thing, and everybody does the slow changeover and the gradual transition and all of that, but then they will switch batches of hay like cold turkey. And hay is actually, it's much more of the horse's diet, and changes in hay quality are a much bigger risk factor for colic. So we all should be a little bit more conscientious about changing between batches of hay. And if you can, build in a few days of a slow changeover where you can mix the old and the new, that would really be best practice. And it's non-negotiable if you've got a really sensitive type that's a chronic colic or that sort of thing.
There we go. It's takes a little extra planning, because unlike buying concentrates or even bagged hay or chaffs, you can't just chuck it into the trunk of your car when the weather's bad, or grab one quick bale. It takes a little bit of extra planning, and I'm totally on your page. You have to get those bales in so that you can switch them over for at least a week anyway. So you can add a little flake here from the old one and a flake there from the new one, and keep everything copacetic
that would
inside
be
that
nice.
gut. Yeah. So let's say you find yourself in that spot where you have a horse that doesn't eat very much hay for whatever reason, or that you find that keeping hay in your location can be hazardous. Sometimes you don't have very much space to store hay safely, so you can only feed limited amounts because you only have a small space to save it. How can we supplement that baled forage for our horses safely and in a nutrient appropriate way?
Yeah. So there's, like you're saying, a good number of scenarios where we might need to feed a forage replacement option. Your toothless old horses, your horses that choke on long stem hay, maybe hay is really scarce or expensive in your area that season, you need to stretch your hay supply. So we can partially to totally supplement or replace the forage component of your diet with hay replacement options. That could be anything from bagged chopped hays, hay cubes, hay pellets, hay stretcher products. We make something called hay stretcher, which is a pellet that is just a substitute for a good quality grass hay. It's not ground up hay because that would defeat the purpose if hay is scarce or expensive, but it's other fiber ingredients that act the same in your horse's gut. Or especially in the case of the old toothless guys who can't chew hay well anymore, you would want to be looking at true complete senior feeds, and a complete feed meaning it's got all that forage built in. It could be their literal complete diet. Think the old guy who eats 15 pounds of senior mush a day. It's got it's like hay plus grain all chopped up and put back together.
Well, that's a great option for horses who, for whatever reason, aren't able to eat that minimum amount of forage. And research is ongoing on what our horses need. What is the current recommendation for a minimum amount of long stem forage for your average horse?
I've got a couple different numbers based on who we're feeding. So I'd like to see most performance horses that are working, kind of average keepers, no other issues, they're probably going to eat about 2% of their body weight in hay a day. If they need to go on a diet and we need to restrict calories, and you've got your air ferns that are already just eating a balancer, the only other way to get calories out of their diet is to look at the amount of hay they're eating. I'm going to pull them back to 1.5% of their body weight, so 15 pounds on a 1,000-pound horse. If we need to even further restrict, a really strict diet would be 1.2%. And then in some research settings or in very, very restricted cases, which we would basically never recommend in practice, 1% is kind of what it takes to at least just keep their guts moving. There are certainly some, like, for example, race horses at the track maybe who are just not very good hay eaters and they're nervous and they've got ulcers, or, you've got a horse in the barn that's just not a very good hay eater. Probably many of them could be down around that 1%, but that is minimum.
Yeah. So what other ways can we help to add good quality forage to those horses who are getting uncomfortably below that 2% for your average horse?
So thinking about those options we talked about, supplementing their hay intake. So maybe somebody's eating 1% of their body weight in hay, and we just need to add to it. I've got barns that maybe they know hay is going to be scarce or expensive and they need to stretch the supply. So they throw flakes morning and night, but then at lunch, instead of throwing a flake of hay, maybe they just give them a scoop of hay stretcher. That is, pound for pound, a perfectly reasonable switch out. It's a perfect alternative to hay. Our impact hay stretcher is actually kind of nutrient balanced as well. So things like that, you just have to do the math in your area and in your season, depending on the economics, what makes sense. But cubes, pellets, hay stretcher, bagged forages are usually not the more economical route. But if you've got a really sensitive case where you really need to have a guaranteed amount of sugar and starches, or a toothless old guy who has a hard time with things but really loves his bagged, chopped, dengy, things like that, then those can be good tools too.
So you have a horse that is on that low end of the recommended pounds per 100 pounds of forage. It's a horse who eats concentrate. Would it be beneficial to go from a standard concentrate, which doesn't have extra forage added, to a complete feed, so that you're not only adding the concentrate that he needs because he needs those calories, but also adds forage because he needs more forage? Are there things that you can do there?
Yeah, that's when you would definitely be wanting to look for something that is labeled as a complete feed. And I think horse owners often confuse that to just mean that it has the complete daily allotment of vitamins and minerals and it's balanced. But that's not what we mean in the feed business by a complete feed. We mean that it could be the complete diet, or it could partially to totally replace hay. So if you need fiber coming in through the bucket, we'll say, to complement the hay they're eating, in flake form, then a complete feed in our lineup, that would be Equine Senior, for example, would be the best move.
All righty. And you guys have some others that also can help perform that task. And if you're curious about what that should be, you can go to purinamills.com/feed-finder. Or if you're old school and not real good at slashes and dashes in your URLs, you can go to purinamills.com and you can get a phone number on that website and speak with one of the nutritionists, and they can really help you out. They're nice. They don't bite. Don't worry, people. And one of the things that we really haven't touched on yet, in the wintertime, the horses are not grazing, so they're not eating a moisture-rich forage. They're eating hay, or they're eating a complete feed, or a combination therein. So how much water they're drinking becomes key. Are there things that we can do to help encourage them to drink as much water as they should?
Yes, that is a good point. When we're talking about the winter and we're talking about hay, we also need to be thinking about water so we don't have impaction colics throughout the winter. So 2 things. Obviously, maintaining a good fresh water supply, and in the winter, we mean a non-icy water supply, because horses will drink better if they've got, it doesn't have to be hot from the house, but at least a non-ice filled water source. And secondary, a source of salt. If they are not going to lick that salt block that you have out in the corner of their stall or out in the paddock, then I prefer to top dress plain loose salt or a nice electrolyte on their meals every day, so that salt is getting into them, which is going to help with that drive to stay hydrated. So that is a really important piece. Also, fun little tool that is good to keep in mind is a mash. We actually make something called Replenimash, which you can add water to, and it makes a nice comforting soup that you can get a good bit of water into your horse with, and it also contains a dose of electrolytes and a dose of Outlast, the gastric buffer, to kind of settle their stomachs. So it's a nice tool when the weather is changing, you've got them walked in the barn, things like that, or just any time you're a little suspicious about whether someone's drinking enough or not.
Oh, Replenimash sounds like a really good thing to have during blizzard season.
For sure.
There we go. And once again, the place you're going to go for really good quality science-based answers to your feeding questions is purinamills.com/feed-finder. Don't go to Professor Facebook for nutrition questions. Go to purinamills.com, and
Amen.
that's where you're going to find the good stuff. Well, thank you once again, Dr. Dunaway, for coming on the show and helping us out and doing a better job of feeding our horses.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
Well, there you have it. Horse Radio Network has thousands of engaging podcasts for horse people, and you can have them sent right to your phone. Just subscribe via your favorite podcast player. This is Coach Jen, and I will be back again soon with another tip. Until then, go ride your horse. The Horse Radio Network and the Horse Radio Network hosts are not responsible for statements made by guests on the Horse Tip Daily. Please use your own judgment when listening to the tips on this show.